Welcome to Off the Record with Paul Hodes and Matt Robison here on WKXL AM and FM, streaming live over the internet at nhtalkradio.com, where you can find all our shows archived for your binge listening pleasure. We are also a podcast on Google, Stitcher, and iTunes. So no matter where you travel in the sanitized air traveling world of ours, you can pick us up on your digital device and take us with you. We're very pleased today to have as our special guest a dear old friend of ours, absolutely one of the premier political strategists and communications experts out there today. He's a partner at top polling and communications firm Global Strategy Group. It's Jim Papa, who is coming to us today from a closet in his home, which is outfitted with special acoustic treatment, the most gorgeous beach towels we have ever seen hung over any door to make sure that his audio is pristine for all our listeners. But let's get back to the real Jim Papa. Before he was at Global Strategy Group, he served as a House and Senate communications staffer, a chief of staff, senior advisor to Democratic Caucus Chairman Rahm Emanuel, and a special assistant to the president for legislative affairs in the Obama White House. Now, Matt and I got to know him really well because I came into Congress in 2006. Rahm was responsible in many ways for getting me there in terms of his strategy and what he put together and his support for my effort. That's a whole other podcast. And Jim was working in that senior advisor role with Rahm, where he was responsible for helping us, the 2006 class of Democratic House freshmen, by providing guidance on message and crisis communications. Now, I can say, luckily, at least when Matt was on board, I never had a crisis, but apparently that's only because Matt had Jim Papa on speed dial. And between the two of them, they were able to keep me on the straight and narrow, avoiding crises. But Jim also worked on stakeholder outreach, on legislation and media. And now to continue this fabulous career, he's the host of his own sensational, must-listen new podcast called Staffer. And there is nobody who is better able to talk about the triumphs and tribulations of being a staffer, other than Matt Robison, it's Jim Papa. So Jim, welcome to Off the Record.
Thank you so much, Paul and Matt. First of all, that introduction is by far the best introduction I've ever gotten in my life, so thank you. I hope you can hear me well because I have outfitted this with my best beach towels.
Yeah, they're really good looking. They're multicolored. Yeah. And as I said, beach towels as acoustic treatment allows you to take a shower, jump into the closet, and dry yourself off before your podcast.
That's right. It's from my old advanced days. You got to solve problems.
It's perfect. Now, Jim, you've had an extraordinary career so far, and you're still only in like the third inning. What got you to being a staffer in the first place? I mean, I met you in 2006, and we're all so busy that we never said, so what was your life like before? How did you get here? How did Rahm find you? Because, I mean, it struck me that Rahm wasn't the easiest guy to work for. I mean, he certainly was not the easiest guy to even talk to. And I'll just tell you one quick behind the scenes story. It was I had run unsuccessfully for Congress in 2004, and had run a genuinely exploratory race, shall we say. I'm being as kind to myself as possible. And I went down to visit Rahm in 2006 when he was chair of the DCCC. I went into the office. He was sitting behind his desk. He looked up briefly, and I said, "Hi, Rahm, I'm Paul Hodes." He said, "I know who you are. Go raise $1 million and come back when you've done that." And so that was the conversation.
It sounds like Rahm.
And
yeah.
I did, but but he also used an expletive, which I won't repeat on the air because of the media rules. So, and that was Rahm. So, how'd you get there?
Yeah, first I will say I was tremendously lucky to find this career because despite I grew up in upstate New York, a small town outside of Binghamton, New York. My parents were teachers, and they were politically involved. You know, my mom would collect signatures for the Democratic Party, that sort of thing. We were not a political family. We didn't have people running for office or, you know, that sort of thing. I was an avid reader of Time magazine. I was involved in student councils and student government, you know, from an early age in high school and college. And yet, despite all of that, I was too dense to recognize about myself that this even was a career path or that I would love doing it. When I was in college, my junior year, I spent a semester down here in Washington. I interned at CNN. And then I interned for Senator Moynihan of New York that following summer. And I came away from both of those experiences thinking, I don't really love the media and I didn't really love Capitol Hill. So when I went back to college for my senior year, I hatched a plan with a buddy to travel Europe, you know, with backpacks the following summer. And so whenever anyone would ask me that stressful question, oh, what are you going to do next year? I just said, I'm going on a great trip and this is what I'm doing. And it was a great trip, but I came back with no money and no job prospects. And I was living back at my parents' house and lifeguarding again, like I had in high school, riding my bicycle to the pool with a beach towel around my neck. Um, Somebody found my resume online. Okay, in the dawn of the internet era, somebody found it in a resume bank, and it was with a campaign in Connecticut. I interviewed for the finance director job, and I got it. And the way that the job offer came to me was something along the lines of, hey, you're going to need to move to Connecticut immediately. Are you going to stay on the floor of a campaign supporter? It's 7 days a week. The pay is next to nothing. You got to bring your own car, and the guy's going to lose. Do you want the job? And I was like, yes, anything to get me out of where I was. And I went and I had a blast. And I just really loved that campaign. Everything came true. The guy lost. So I had to find another job, and my resume looked like a political resume. I knew how to use the metro in Washington. So I moved here and just started, you know, knocking on doors, and eventually a job opportunity and I intersected successfully. And I started on the Senate side in Senator Daschle's leadership structure. So that's how I got there.
That really just mirrors, I mean, that just sounds, I mean, I don't know that there's a prototypical path, but it really mirrors the experience of so many of us who sort of found our way into this staffer career track. And that's actually a great segue into the podcast. So we're recording this on September 3rd. The very first episode just dropped this morning. I'm almost done with it. It is as spectacular as Paul laid out. And by the way, I'm so jealous. I'm actually a little mad at you that you thought of this idea. It's such a great idea. It's, you know, for listeners, I really hope that you will check this out and subscribe. It's like, if you like The West Wing and you like seeing behind the curtain, how things get done, what people's lives are like in these super high pressure, high stakes jobs, the mix of like the drudgery and the glamour, this is the podcast for you. So what motivated you to do this podcast? I mean, you know so much about politics from the inside. You know, when you decided to relate some of that publicly to the wider world, why do it through the lens of the stories of staffers?
Yeah. First, thank you for the plug and the kind words about episode 1. I do hope people like it as much as I've enjoyed producing it. Look, being a staffer, as you know, Matt, and Paul, I'm sure as you observed with your staff, it is meaningful work. It's interesting. It is high intensity. And along the way, you get to have an impact on the trajectory of current events. You make great friends. You acquire great mentors. And so for me, the experience was life-changing. I just absolutely loved it. It treated me well. And I have noticed that being a staffer actually gives you a lot of skills that are unique, particularly at that age. And I think some of the reasons are, number one, it's a public endeavor. Even though staffers are anonymous, you are feeding up to a principle where everything that they say and do is public, and that environment is antagonistic, right? Reporters are always watching Congressman Paul Hodes to find out what mistake he's going to make. The NRCC is intentionally trying to make every Democrat in the House look bad, and we're trying to do the same, to every House Republican. So there is a really high premium on doing things 100% accurately, and doing them well so that they're memorable and impactful. That's not an environment that even many in the business world, as combative as the business world is, it's not every single day that, Pepsi is launching, something that is absolutely going to, take a cut out of Coke. And yet on Capitol Hill, it is that antagonism happening every day actually sharpens one's edge and builds a lot of muscles. And the other thing I would just note, I interviewed, I'll break a little news here, upcoming episode is with Steve Schmidt. And when I asked him his view of like why it's a good, career, he said at a very young age, you are given a lot of responsibility and you got to make a lot of decisions and then be held accountable for those decisions. So whether you're managing an attorney general's race or a mayor's race or whatever, you're given 25, 26, 27-year-olds budgets and decision-making authority, and they got to do it right. And that is that's like a pressure speed cooker all in one, to producing people that have great skills and have a lot of fun along the way.
When I have talked to people about what it's like to be a member of Congress, they are often quite surprised when I say, oh, by the way, the country is run by 23-year-olds. The member of Congress really is a mouthpiece, but really we're just regurgitating what we're getting from our staff because they're running the show and they just tell us what to do and where to go and when to do it. And we say, okay, and we do it. And I say that slightly tongue in cheek, but only slightly. And you've really, I think, hit on this constructive antagonism that helps our political system run. Sometimes, a lot of people feel that it's flared into too much real antagonism instead of getting things done in the political back and forth, but we'll call it constructive antagonism. So here you are, you've got all this experience, you're inviting folks to tell their stories on the podcast. A lot of people really well, you're plugged in to everything in the world of politics. Is there anything that you found surprising? What did you find surprising?
Yeah, one of the things that I find interesting, and I don't know whether I knew this before or not, or whether it was part of a motivating, factor into why I wanted to talk to folks about their stories, is, everybody comes from somewhere. One of my guests is the scion of a very well-known and successful business. And, after being in the business world, he then pursued a career in public service. One of my guests was raised by a single mom, and, they only got by with government supports like rental assistance and food stamps. And they've both gotten into this world and had incredible impact. And when we announce them, you will know their names. I think part of that is that there's in campaigns and politics, there's more work than there are people. And once you get in, you can, you can demonstrate through your actions and your smarts that you're worthwhile.
We're talking with Jim Papa, an old friend of Matt's and mine, who's a partner at top polling and communications firm Global Strategy Group, a highly experienced staffer in his own right, who's got a new sensational podcast out called Staffer. It's a must listen. This is Off the Record with Matt Robison and Paul Hodes on WKXL AM and FM. We're streamed live at nhtalkradio.com and podcast on Google, Stitcher, and iTunes. Please don't go away. We're going to be back in just a few with more Off the Record. We're back. It's Off the Record with Matt Robison and Paul Hodes here on WKXL, AM and FM, streamed live over the interwebs at nhtalkradio.com for your binge listening pleasure. We're also podcast, Google, Stitcher, and iTunes, so you can listen to us on your personal digital devices. We are speaking today with a great old friend of ours, Jim Papa, who, when I first met him, was helping Rahm Emanuel help me become a congressman. And let me tell you, that was quite a job. I was thrust into a world that I had never known. I had never set foot inside the Capitol before I was elected. I didn't know whether it was heads up or heads down. I somehow got myself elected president of the freshman class, and it was Rahm, Emanuel, and Jim that I turned to for advice. So Jim, welcome back. We're really happy to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's really a pleasure to be talking with you today.
All right, let me jump in, and I just want to turn back to the podcast one more time. We won't belabor it, but I was hoping, Jim, you could just give our listeners just a taste, a little preview of what they might expect when they go over and subscribe to the Staffer podcast. What's I don't want to say the best story. You don't have to give away your best stuff, but can you think of one of the best things that you've heard so far that people will get when they listen to the pod?
Yeah. Well, I do explore with people how they got to where they were, and where they are today, what their observations are about the job. But of course, we like to tell stories. And one story that you will hear is a guest who was an assistant to the president, meaning they are the top of a function. In this case, it was the head of legislative affairs for President Obama. And she was the person who, when President Obama had a legislative issue, that's who he turned to. Well, they are in the Oval Office whipping an important vote. So she's got the paperwork, right? And he's making phone calls. She sits down on the couch in the Oval, which I'm sure you've all seen, in the shots, and here's a big tear. And what she realizes is the back of her skirt has completely torn, and she just stays there. They continue working, but eventually the president's like, okay, we're done here. And she realized she can't stand up. She communicates this, but what follows is an incredible story, right? Of determination, of grit, of teamwork coming together to save the day, because that was not, I'll just tell you, that was not the last thing she had to do that day. And she didn't run home and change clothes. So another solution was found, and people had to contribute to that. So there.
Oh man.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really the behind the scenes look at what it takes to run a country. Safety pins and tape. So let's talk for a little bit about your own experience as a staffer. You worked for my friends. You worked for my former colleague Rosa DeLauro in communications. You were chief of staff to Rush Holt, who, for people who either don't know or may have forgotten, is an actual scientist. He's a physicist working in Congress. He is a real brainy guy. And then you worked for Rahm Emanuel. Now, the stories about Rahm are legendary. He was the third ranking Democrat in the House. He was largely responsible for the strategy for getting members elected in the toughest seats and keeping them there, especially in the historic class of 2006, where when we were elected to a majority in the House, Democrats hadn't been in the majority since 1994, if I'm correct. And as I recall, 70% of the people I came in to serve with had never experienced what it was like to be in the majority. So in addition to getting us there, there was also this huge lift on actual work, on legislation in an amount that was unprecedented in congressional history. And then you went on to work in the White House. So you have experience being in Congress from every angle. But let's talk about what it was like to be responsible for helping dumb freshmen like me. Now, I say dumb because I was an accidental congressman. I came into Congress and I was serving with people who had actual experience. They'd been governors, or they'd been state senate presidents, or they'd been something. And I walked in goggle-eyed, bleary-eyed, never having really even been in Washington. I'd got myself elected to Congress. Now, I adapted pretty quickly, but that was because you and Rahm and guys like Matt Robison helped me. So it's a total whirlwind. The pressure comes on immediately. Now, there was a group of us who were talking about writing a book about the freshman class. I recall that you and Matt and Rahm and a few other people talked us out of that one because we didn't want the stories out at the time. But now we're all safely gone. And you can tell our listeners what people might not realize about what it means to be a new member of Congress from the point of view of somebody who was like the shepherd with his sheep, and you'd come out in the morning with your crook and find that the sheep had wandered off to the far edges of the pasture, and you had to somehow collect them and redirect them towards some kind of productive, constructive group that could get something done. How did you do that?
You know, first of all, you're selling yourself short. You and many of your colleagues, even those who had not served in public office, had a much more political acumen than you give yourself credit for. But being a member of Congress, the moment you're elected, you think like, I'm at the summit, right? Like this thing we've been working toward, we've just done it. Let's all raise our hands in victory, take a deep breath, and get some rest and think about the future. And unfortunately, that is not at all what happens. I remember on election night, Rahm called me and was like, I need you to call every single person who's won and begin talking to them, congratulate them, but begin talking to them about their staff, like who they're going to hire for their Washington staff, because that may not be who their campaign staff is. So the very next day, we were recommending people go out there and thank voters, go someplace in front of a Stop and Shop and start thanking people. You got to call all of your, campaign supporters, thank them. You need to be thinking about, well, what committees, am I supposed to be on? I'm doing Washington in a couple of weeks for orientation. Oh, all these people are calling me now. They're leadership elections. I got to cast a vote in this caucus election for who needs to be our leader and our whip and our caucus chair. And how many positions are there? Plus, as I mentioned, you got to hire staff. You've got to explore some real estate for your district offices. You've got to figure out how the departing member and all of the constituent service backlog that they're not going to get to gets transferred to you, because in early January, those are people who are desperately in need of your help now. And you don't really know yet how that federal bureaucracy is supposed to work yet, to like help them. So all of these things need to be figured out. And I tried, my role at that time was to facilitate almost all of that, right? So to make hiring a little easier, to help you think through all the ways things can go sideways. It's all, and one of the easiest ways that things go sideways, you mentioned how hard it is to be a member of Congress. And Rush Holt described being a member of Congress as being a television set where somebody else changes the channel every 5 minutes. And I think that's right, which means there's no focus.
By the way, I used to call it Hollywood East. I still do.
Yeah, right. There's an element of that too. But as a result, you might not have focus. And you have to be really disciplined at the outset for what it is you want to say about yourself, how you actually marry up the campaign promises and what people voted for with now who you are as congressman. And that begins with Well, what's your first speech on the floor about? What is the first bill you're going to co-sponsor? What is the first bill you're going to introduce as your own? That type of, execution doesn't happen in mid-January. That's got to start in mid-November. Plus, there are all sorts of things that go wrong. And I know. Fortunately, you did not step in it like some of your colleagues, but
you don't know the half of it. Let me tell you, because before Robison came on to guide me to some semblance of success, I stepped in it. I stepped in it from the beginning by not following the good advice I got. I hired my campaign manager as my first chief of staff. I spent, 5 months wandering in the wilderness trying to figure out why things felt so awful. And then Robison came in and, as a really brilliant staffer, righted the ship. So
need that.
It's tough.
Yeah, everybody needs that. To really succeed, breaking through as an elected official in your local media markets and, the Washington media markets, so that you can communicate to people who you are and what you're about, is really hard, and you've got to, it's not just about quote unquote staying on message. It is about finding those opportunities to prove that you are who you say you are. Do that relentlessly, day in and day out. And if you're lucky, after 2 years of doing that successfully, week in and week out, people will have an inkling and give you another shot. But that's what you're planning.
That's what's really amazing. I couldn't agree more. And, I think this goes back to something you were saying earlier about, you're always under the microscope. You're always under the lens. Everything you're doing is in that public petri dish. And, I want to go back to something. I did an interview with you 2.5 years ago, and you gave me a quote that really stuck with me. I'm going to quote you back to you, Jim. You said, every day there's an opportunity for an error, for a wrong vote, or some sort of mistake that will end up in a television ad with millions of dollars behind it, holding you accountable for something in the last weeks of your campaign. And that to me captures the quintessential experience of being a member like Paul in one of these contested seats where you are going to have that experience, and being a staffer with that responsibility, your whole job. So it's not just that the performance of your job. Can you imagine in other jobs in society, if not only were you being watched at all times, you were being watched by people who were antagonistic to your success, who were rooting for your failure. So, I think one of the things that I learned from you was that what goes into being a successful staffer is that constant scan for threats and opportunities. You're always looking out for what's that thing that will come back to bite you at the end, or what is that thing that you can inject into the public consciousness that will help you politically and also do some good for the people you represent. Is that right? Is that a fair characterization of the approach that you mentor to other people when you advise other people about how to be good in their staff jobs? Is that basically on?
Absolutely. So proactively, I was always demanding that my colleagues and the members were developing plans and executing plans proactively that aligned the functions of the congressional office to drive the values and the proof points that those elected officials like to say about themselves. And you could pick 3 adjectives that you want to say about yourself and 3 accomplishments. All of your proactive energy needs to be spent, almost all that, on those. But then scanning for opportunities, right? Opening up the newspaper every day and saying, how can I bring a federal solution to this local problem, national problem? What's my role here? What can I do? And do it in a way that illustrates those values. And in terms of risk avoidance, look, I'm a big believer in, like, if you're planning something, all the risk is in like the last 12 inches of the plan. So, let's not overreach. Let's do something smart, something as easy as a town hall. In New Hampshire, you have such a great, tradition of town halls. Well, something that I learned was, if you have kids come give the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning, the adults behave better. So why not invite the Cub Scout troop or whatever to come do that? Then instead of maybe having 4 cranks yelling at you, you've only got 1, or all of them behave, in accordance with decorum. It's things like that that do make a lot of difference, especially when trackers are recording you, hoping that you'll react poorly and then put it online.
It's Off the Record with Paul Hodes and Matt Robison here on WKXL. We're talking with Jim Papa, our old friend, partner at top polling and communications firm Global Strategy Group, and staffer extraordinaire in the House, in the Senate, in the White House, the guy who knows how to make members of Congress do their job and do it well. We'll be right back after this with more Off the Record. Don't go away. We're back. It's Off the Record with Matt Robison and Paul Hodes here on WKXL AM and FM, streamed live over the internet at nhtalkradio.com. And we're also now a podcast on Google, Stitcher, and iTunes. We're talking with Jim Papa, our old friend from congressional days, who is a partner at the top polling and communications firm Global Strategy Group and has served in the House and the Senate as a senior advisor to Rahm Emanuel, as assistant to the president for legislative affairs in the Obama White House. He is a guy who knows how the intricacies of the world of politics in DC work, and we are happy to have him. Jim, welcome back.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So nowadays in politics, there is so much more information, communication channels, competition for content, money in campaigns. I mean, when I was running, it was, imagine this, before Google, before iPhones, before iPads, before Zoom, before everything. I mean,
did you run in the Eisenhower administration?
I actually I ran in the administration of Franklin Pierce, President Franklin Pierce. It was I mean, we got on our horses, we rode to Congress. It took days and days and days to get there. So of course we never left. But the malaria down in the swamp was even worse than it is today in those days. But things have actually changed. Now, some of those things are tools, of course, but they're also obstacles to navigate around. Do you think being a member of Congress has gotten any easier? Is it harder? And what about being a staffer these days, being one of those 20-somethings who's actually running the country? Have the new tools of the last decade made it easier or harder?
Yeah, I would say overall, I think it's harder, both being a member and being a staffer. That's something that not every member of Congress may realize, by the way. We were talking about kind of the frontline experience, meaning those Democrats, and Republicans who have really tough races. Most elected officials in the House and in the Senate are safely reelected. And as a result, they actually don't have the experience of constantly being under this pressure. As for like the pace of things, I mentioned earlier the description that Rush Holt gave of being a TV set where somebody else changes the channel every 5 minutes. Maybe that's outdated. Maybe it's where somebody changes the channel every 10 seconds. If you're a staffer today, you need to know what is flowing on Twitter and whether your boss needs to be like part of that conversation. If something's being said about the boss, it's not a 24-hour news cycle now. It's like a 24-minute news cycle. So I do think all of that intensity has only been dialed up. The only upside of that is, controversies do burn out faster. So something bad that may have lasted a week before probably lasts a couple of days now. I guess the other thing I would say that just the overall governing challenge is Washington is in this bad habit right now of governing only by crisis. And so we pass big bills when there's a big deadline or something awful that might happen, or in the case of a pandemic, something global that requires a massive response. that makes it hard to demonstrate your value if you are, what you want to be as a member is like getting your amendment into the transportation bill that's moving, at a regular time. You want to be able to, take a piece of any one of these bills and have your impact on it. When those bills aren't moving regularly, it's a lot harder to, shape them and to demonstrate to folks that you are fighting for all the things that you said you were going to fight for.
So I want to ask you, I mean, you've worked for some legendary figures in the last, quarter century of American politics, historically in American politics. Before I do, I just have to go back to something so super smart that you said a few minutes ago about the level of attention to detail, thinking about something like having a kid say the Pledge of Allegiance if you're going to have a town hall. It just put me in mind of when I became actually Paul's chief of staff. When I became a chief of staff for the first time, I'd been a deputy chief of staff. I asked my former boss, well, what are the tips? What are the tricks? He couldn't answer that question succinctly because it turned out that the trick is all of it. It's all of the little details, all of the attention to sort of the painstaking, he brought up, like, find out every member of the state legislature's birthday and make sure that there's a handwritten note from your member to them, which is something that we tried to do for Paul. It's a million small things. And I think that that's one of the reasons why it's actually possible for 20-somethings to do this job, because it doesn't require a PhD. You don't have to be Rush Holt. What it requires is commitment, intelligence, attention to detail. Anyway, that is a sidebar. I'm off my soapbox. Let's talk Rahm Emanuel. Rahm Emanuel is truly legendary. He is aggressive, hard-edged. He once sent a dead fish wrapped in newspaper to a vanquished opponent. Maybe that's apocryphal. He had his middle finger half cut off in a teenage accident, which President Obama famously said rendered him functionally mute. And then you've got this contrast. You then went from working for Rahm, who is like, politics on 11, to working for President Obama, who is legendarily cerebral, thoughtful, strategic, tireless, without, giving away any trade secrets. What was it like working for Rahm?
Yeah.
Working for Barack.
So just before Jim tells us that,
go ahead.
I have to throw in my one quick Rahm story. It was in the last week of my successful campaign in 2006. And I'm going to try to say this without getting us thrown off the air. So I'm in a car. I just addressed a big crowd at a college. It felt very successful. I had no idea how things were going to come down. The phone rings and I pick it up. Paul, yeah, it's Rahm. Okay, don't F it up. Excuse me? Don't F it up. Okay, call your effing mother and tell her you're not going to F it up because I just put how many is that? 7. I think
it was $1.5 million.
I just put 7 figures on you in Boston. So if you F it up, I'm coming for you. Got it? Yes. Button, click. That was.
And I would just like to point out that's a good news call.
That's right.
That's how he delivered the good news.
That's right.
Look, comparing and contrasting, those two, the President Obama and Rahm, is like very different. I also don't want to overstate how closely I worked with the president. I certainly had exposure to him, and when he was engaging with the 75 or 85 members who were assigned to me, we were in close proximity, and I would brief him up. He would have conversations. They would be brought to the Oval or on Air Force One or whatever. So I'd be a participant there, but I was not the highest on the highest rung there. With Rahm, look, I worked closely with him for 5 years, the first couple of years on the Hill when he was caucus chairman and then at the White House. And I guess I would describe it as, batting practice with Ted Williams every day. I mean, it was a real blessing to be able to learn from and actively participate with somebody who is the absolute, top, 1% of the 1%. And his intensity, of course, drove me. So I was a chief of staff immediately prior to being in this position for Rahm. And I knew my stuff really well. I just had to, now multiply it times 35. I had to know what was going on in 35 different districts. I needed to know their polling, their media markets, what counties they needed to spend time with, what they were planning for their upcoming district, schedules, where they were with their legislative program, what do they have with their earned media plans. I mean, I had to know everything, to your point, Matt, everything. And then there was the incoming of like, somebody says something stupid, somebody takes a bad vote, somebody, right? Like, things happen and we needed to manage that. And just working with him was phenomenal. He loved your class, Paul. That was the class of 06 that helped us take back the House for the first time since 94, as you said. And so he, getting you all reelected in 2008 was a labor of love. So we talked all the time, and he made me better at what I do. And I also will say, kind of the third component here is like actually working with the chiefs of staff and the members made me better. I mean, I didn't have every answer. I wasn't the only one talking. I learned a lot from that group of people, and we solved problems together. And that's why it was such, a lot of magic in that 2-year period from all directions.
Yeah, I'm really lucky because I will just give a kudo, and I don't want to embarrass my co-host Matt Robison, but here we are, years later, working together, and we've worked together on a number of different things, some successful, some less successful, but having a lot of fun on the radio show. And I've got to say that a good chief of staff can save a member of Congress, and certainly. In my case, that's what happened. Robison came to the interview for me with a 6-pack of Dr. Brown's Celeray tonic, which is why he got the job. But it turned out he was a master of detail and was able to keep me with my kind of off the top of the brain style. He was able to keep me in line. In a way. President Obama was much more cerebral than Rahm Emanuel. It was a real contrast in styles. But before we go, we have about four minutes left. We've got to pick your brain because here we've got you, and you are, you're a top communications political strategy expert. And Global Strategy is one of the top polling firms out there. We're 60 days out from election. In that 60 days, with so many things that Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, and Democrats could say or could focus on, what are the 2 things that you'd move up to the top of the Democrats' to-do list in terms of communication or strategy? What are the 2 things, or if not the very top, got to move them up in the pecking order to bring this thing home?
Yeah. We do a ton of polling for Democrats and causes all across the country. We actually do more polling for Democrats at the federal level than any other polling firm. There is one client we have where our research is public. It's called navigatorresearch.org. So people can go there, and we are regularly putting out polling memos. Top 3 issues that people care about right now: coronavirus at 61%, economy and jobs, and followed by healthcare. And all 3 of those obviously are now tangled in a way that they've never been. We used to consider economy and jobs different from healthcare. Not the case anymore. A tranche below that top 3, you've got Social Security and Medicare, race relations, wages, cost of living. And for Democrats, among Democratic voters, climate change is also up there. The name of the game here is talking enough about issues that really matter to your Democratic base, that they perform, very, very well. They want to come to the polls, and you are communicating to that swing center vote on the issues that they care about in those swing states that are going to determine the election, so that they come over. I would say, based on the polling that I'm looking at, the one thing that Democrats could modify about their messaging is the ordering around economy and jobs. So voters are critical of Republicans for not saying enough or doing enough or taking seriously enough the pandemic. Likewise with climate change. Where voters need to hear a little more from Democrats is economy and jobs. we get much higher marks on those other things than we do on economy and jobs. Obviously, it is, as I said, these are all tangled. Just in how we are addressing things, what they're hearing is we are very focused on getting the pandemic under control, making sure that people have the care that they need, and have the basics, but it hasn't yet broken through on the restart the economy. And I think Biden's message of Build Back Better is actually a great message. That is exactly, what people need to hear more of. So it would just be a matter of emphasis, in my opinion.
Well, Jim Papa, thank you for joining us on Off the Record here on WKXL AM and FM. We've been talking with Jim Papa, top strategist at the Global Strategy Group and staffer extraordinaire to members of Congress, members of the Senate, and in the White House. It's been great. Thank you so much for being here. And,
it has been
folks,
great to be here.
Let me just say, he's got a new podcast. Jim Papa's podcast is called Staffer, and you've got to listen to it because it will take you behind the scenes with the stories of the people who are really running the country, the 22-year-olds that members of Congress really count on. So don't go away, folks. Matt Robison and I will be back in just a moment to wrap up. We're back. It's Off the Record with Paul Hodes and Matt Robison on WKXL AM and FM, streaming live over the internet at nhtalkradio.com, podcast on Google, Stitcher, and iTunes. Well, Matt Robison, as they say in radio, using both your names. Well, Matt Robison, Jim Papa, using both his names, was really something. I have to say that there may have been nobody who I met in Congress who had more to do with keeping me on the straight and narrow and whatever success I had and we had as a team than Jim Papa, who was working for Rahm Emanuel, who made sure that we took advantage of everything we could take advantage of and tried to keep us from stepping in it day after day after day.
I hope that if people take anything away from listening to this show and hopefully to Jim's podcast, it's that if you're younger in your career, you're thinking about what direction to go in, you really can make a difference. If you're thinking about maybe getting into government, maybe getting into politics, it's sometimes portrayed in a negative way in media. It's not. I mean, there are elements that aren't great, but it's not like that. It's actually, it's a place where you can do something that matters, and it's incredibly exciting, and I hope people got a sense of that listening to Jim today.
It's Off the Record with Matt Robison and Paul Hodes on WKXL. Thanks to our sponsors who keep this great station on the air. Thanks to all of you for listening. We'll be back next week with another edition of Off the Record. See ya, folks.